bigger than a little.
The money's going all over the world.
Goddamn right, I'm a problem.
No ways.
We have to kill him before he...
It's flammable as fuck.
The film was directed by David Ayer, known for Fury and Suicide Squad, and written by Kurt Wimmer, the mind behind Law-Abiding Citizen. This creative pairing immediately signals a gritty, violent action thriller with a high-concept premise rather than a realistic drama. Continues with its casting. Jason Statham stars as Adam Clay, with Josh Hutcherson as the antagonist Derek Danforth, Emmy Raver-Lampman as FBI agent Verona Parker, Jeremy Irons as the cynical Wallace Westwild, and Felicia Rashad as the tragic Eloise Parker. This ensemble balances veteran gravitas with younger energy. Addresses critical reception. Rotten Tomatoes sits around 71%, moderately fresh, while IMDb averages 6.3/10, and French site Allociné gives mixed spectator scores of 2.8 to 3.2 out of 5. Critics generally praise the action choreography, but mock the absurdity of the plot's central metaphor. Establishes the film's classic wronged man seeks vengeance narrative structure, but with a crucial escalation from street-level crime to the White House. Unlike simpler revenge films, this one systematically dismantles layers of protection around its villains. The quiet life and the tragedy form the first act. Adam Clay lives a secluded life as a beekeeper in rural Massachusetts, renting a barn from the kind-hearted retired teacher Eloise Parker. Despite his quiet exterior, he maintains a deep friendship with her. Eloise falls victim to a sophisticated phishing scam. She clicks a link, granting hackers access to her accounts, which drain over $2 million from the charity fund she manages. Financially ruined and humiliated, she commits suicide. Clay discovers her body and the reason for her despair. He quickly tracks the scammers to a call center run by Derek Danforth, a wealthy Nepo baby, tech bro. Clay assaults the facility with brutal efficiency, setting the stage for a war. It is revealed that Adam is not merely a farmer, he is a former beekeeper. In this universe, the Beekeepers are a legendary, off-the-books intelligence agency designed to protect the hive, society, by eliminating rot from the top down. As Clay burns his way up the corporate ladder, he comes into conflict with the FBI, including Eloise's daughter, Verona, and private military contractors. He discovers that Derek's scam operation is protected by his mother, President Jessica Danforth, whose campaign was funded by the illegal profits. Clay storms the 9-Star United Center, Danforth's headquarters, kills Derek and exposes the corruption, sacrificing his clean record to protect the hive of society. The film relentlessly uses beekeeping terminology as a metaphor for societal collapse. Adam Clay views society as a bee colony. The elderly, Eloise, are the worker bees who built the hive. The scammers, Derek, are the wasps or mites who feed on the hive without contributing. Clay positions himself as the Queen's guardian, a figure intended to kill the corrupt drones to save the colony. His key quote defines the entire philosophy. "You have laws for these things until they fail. Then you have me." Unlike John Wick, which is about personal retribution for a stolen car and a dead dog, The Beekeeper is about structural failure. Eloise followed the rules, trusted the banks, and relied on the police. The system failed her because the scammers are protected by the highest office in the land. The film argues that when corruption reaches the political elite, the only recourse is extralegal violence. This is a darker, more cynical worldview than most vigilante films, which typically stop at street-level criminals. Several critics noted a subtle but aggressive boomer versus tech bro subtext running throughout the narrative. The victims are the elderly. Eloise represents the greatest/silent generation. The villains are millennials and Gen Z. Derek rides a skateboard in the office, has frosted tips, and speaks in internet slang. The hero is Gen X, as Statham embodies the forgotten generation who fixes the problems the younger generation creates and the older generation tolerates. This intergenerational warfare gives the film an unexpected political edge. According to Allociné and NYT critics, The Beekeeper does not try to be realistic. Statham is 56 years old, yet he moves like a superhero. The film belongs to the subgenre of old man action, alongside Taken and The Equalizer. The pleasure of the film is not, will he win? But how ridiculously will he win? This self-awareness is crucial to understanding its appeal. The film knows exactly what it is. French reviewer Cinephile noted, "Visionnaire The Beekeeper relève soit de l'inconscience soit de la bêtise humaine." Watching The Beekeeper is either unconsciousness or human stupidity. This reflects a general consensus. The plot is nonsense, but the action choreography is crisp, violent, and satisfying. The explosion of a gas station that burns down a call center, despite gas stations not exploding like that in real life, is a perfect example of the film's cartoon logic. Physics bend to serve spectacle. Unlike John Wick's emotional vulnerability, Clay is a void of efficiency. He rarely speaks, has no romantic interest, and exists solely as a corrective mechanism for the world. The NYT noted that he is essentially a force of nature, rather than a man. Josh Hutcherson plays against type as Derek Danforth. Derek is not a physical threat. He is an entitled idiot protected by money. He represents the tech bro culture that disrupts industries, including scams, without moral consequence. The Winnie the Pooh joke that Derek tells becomes a symbol of his character. A man in a suit playing at being dangerous, ultimately revealed as pathetic and cowardly when his protection is stripped away. Jeremy Irons plays Wallace Westwild, the ex-CIA chief who now runs security for the Danforth operation. He is interesting because he knows how the world works. Unlike the brash Derek, Wallace respects Adam Clay because he understands that beekeepers are the apex predators of the spy world. Wallace's death signifies the end of the old intelligent corruption making way for pure chaos, Derek. This is a subtle commentary on how experienced, calculating evil is being replaced by reckless, stupid evil in the modern world. David Ayer brings a gritty, street-level brutality to the fight choreography. Unlike the balletic gun-fu of John Wick, Ayer prefers bludgeoning force. Fights are short, heavy, and end with broken bones and shattered skulls. The destruction of the call center features a notable scene where Statham uses a taser in a puddle of water to electrocute multiple enemies. This is a visually striking moment that prioritizes cool factor over any realistic workplace safety standards. The cinematography deliberately contrasts the golden, peaceful honeycombs of Adam's apiary, representing the good hive, with the cold, blue steel of the FBI offices and the Danforth headquarters, representing the corrupt human world. Critics universally note that the bee puns are both the film's greatest flaw and its greatest charm. Lines like "to be E or not to be E" are delivered with such solemnity that they break the immersion for some viewers. Yet the film fully commits to the bit. The clandestine organization is actually called the Beekeepers. Their method involves stinging the corrupt and cutting out the rot, like a diseased comb. This tight thematic linking, though silly, gives the film a unique identity among generic action movies. The character of Verona Parker, Eloise's daughter and an FBI agent, provides the audience's moral compass. She initially wants to stop Clay because he is a vigilante operating outside the law, but gradually comes to understand that he is doing what she cannot. Verona's arc is one of disillusionment with institutional authority. She represents the well-intentioned but handcuffed official who must eventually admit that the system is broken. President Jessica Danforth, played by Gemma Redgrave, is a fascinating villain because she is not personally evil. She is a politician who allowed corruption to fund her campaign and then protected the source. Her sin is willful blindness, not malice. The film suggests that enabling evil through negligence is as destructive as committing it directly. Jessica's protection of Derek, her own son, allows thousands of Eloises to be ruined. The Beekeepers as an organization are deliberately left mysterious. The film reveals only that they exist outside all government oversight, that they answer to no one, and that they operate with absolute impunity. This vagueness is a storytelling weakness but a thematic strength. Adam Clay's backstory is never fully explained. We learn he was a beekeeper, that he left the organization, and that he chose a quiet life. Why he left remains unknown, adding to his mythic, almost supernatural quality. The film's pacing is exceptionally tight at 105 minutes. There is no wasted screen time, no romantic subplot, no unnecessary detour. Every scene pushes the narrative forward toward the next violent confrontation. This efficiency is rare in modern action cinema, which often bloats runtime with world building. The Beekeeper trusts its simple premise and executes it without apology. The call center sequence establishes the film's rules early. Clay does not negotiate, does not threaten, does not monologue. He simply eliminates everyone in his path with mechanical precision. The escalating scale of destruction mirrors Clay's ascent through the layers of protection around Derek. First a call center, then a security team, then private military contractors, then the Secret Service, then the president herself. Each level of opposition is stronger and more professional than the last, yet Clay dispatches them all with the same emotionless efficiency. This creates a tension-free viewing experience where the audience never doubts the outcome. The film's violence is notably non-stylized. Air avoids slow motion and artistic framing. Punches land with ugly thuds, bones crack audibly, and deaths are quick and graceless. This brutality sells the idea that Clay is not a hero but a necessary monster. The dialogue is sparse, with Statham delivering fewer than 100 lines in the entire film. Most of his characterization comes from actions, not words. He is a man who communicates through violence. Josh Hutcherson's performance as Derek is deliberately annoying. He whines, postures, and throws tantrums when things go wrong. The audience is meant to despise him not because he is threatening, but because he is insufferable. This is a clever inversion of the typical action villain. Derek is not a worthy adversary. He is a parasite whose only power comes from the wealth and connections he did nothing to earn. Jeremy Irons brings genuine gravitas to Wallace Westwild, delivering his lines with the weary cynicism of a man who has seen everything. His respect for Clay is palpable, and their final confrontation has a melancholy weight. The film's treatment of the elderly is surprisingly tender. Eloise is not portrayed as a fool for falling for the scam. She is portrayed as a trusting, generous woman exploited by predators who specifically target the vulnerable. This humanization of the victim gives Clay's rampage moral weight. He is not avenging a warrior or a spy. He is avenging a kind old woman who fed him dinner and asked about his bees. The scam operation itself is depicted realistically. The call center employees are not cartoon villains. They are low-level workers following scripts. Clay kills many of them without hesitation, raising uncomfortable moral questions. The film does not dwell on these questions. It assumes that anyone participating in the scam, even at the lowest level, has forfeited their right to sympathy. This is a harsh, unforgiving moral universe. President Danforth's protection of Derek is revealed through Wallace's testimony. She did not know the full extent of his crimes, but she benefited from them and shielded him from investigation. For Clay, this is enough to condemn her. The climax at the 9-Star United Center is a masterclass in action staging. Clay fights through waves of Secret Service agents, private security, and finally Derek's personal guard, all while the building burns around him. Derek's death is anticlimactic by design. After an entire film of buildup, Clay simply catches him, holds him, and watches him die. There is no final fight, no exchange of blows. Derek is too pathetic to deserve an honorable death. The film ends with Clay walking away into anonymity. He is not arrested, not celebrated, not mourned. He simply disappears, ready to protect another hive if needed. This open ending suggests a possible franchise. The Beekeepers as a concept allows for infinite sequels. Any corrupt institution, any protected criminal, any failure of justice could summon a beekeeper. The film builds a cinematic universe in a single line of dialogue. Comparing the Beekeeper to John Wick is inevitable, but the differences are instructive. Wick fights for personal vengeance and emotional closure. Clay fights for structural correction and abstract justice. Wick is a grieving husband who loved dogs. Clay is a man with no apparent attachments beyond a vague sense of duty. Wick is humanized by his pain. Clay is dehumanized by his lack of it. The film's political implications are uncomfortable for some critics. Its solution to corruption is not reform, not voting, not protest, but extrajudicial assassination by an unaccountable shadow organization. This is a deeply authoritarian fantasy dressed in vigilante clothing. The film never acknowledges the danger of placing such power in unmonitored hands. It assumes the beekeepers are always morally correct. Audiences generally ignore this subtext because the film moves too fast to allow reflection. The action is relentless, the violence cathartic, and the jokes, such as they are, land quickly. Critical thinking is not required. The bee metaphor extends to the film's structure. A hive mind has no individual heroes. It has functions. Clay is not a protagonist with interiority. He is a stinger deployed against a threat to the colony. This explains why Clay has no backstory, no friends, no hobbies beyond beekeeping. He is not a person, he is a tool. The film is honest about this, which is both its strength and its limitation. The supporting cast exists only to react to Clay. Verona questions him, Wallace respects him, Derek fears him. No character exists independently of his gravity. This narrows the film's emotional range, but sharpens its focus. The production design deserves praise. The apiary is warm and organic, filled with golden light and natural textures. The Danforth headquarters is cold, angular, and bathed in unnatural blue and white light. This visual dichotomy reinforces the thematic opposition between natural order, the hive, and corrupt artifice, the scam operation. Good is organic, evil is synthetic. The film's sound design emphasizes the physicality of violence. Punches land with wet thuds, gunshots crack sharply, and bones snap audibly. The bees themselves produce a constant low drone in peaceful scenes, replaced by silence during violence. This sonic contrast between life, buzzing, and death, silence, is subtle but effective. When Clay fights, the bees go quiet. Nature itself seems to hold its breath. The film's runtime of 105 minutes is perfectly calibrated for its ambitions. It does not overstay its welcome, nor does it feel rushed. Every beat lands, and the credits roll before fatigue sets in. The Beekeeper is not a good movie in the traditional Oscar bait sense. It is a highly efficient B-movie machine with exceptional pacing, brutal Statham fight scenes, and a blissfully absurd willingness to escalate its plot to the highest levels of government. The cons include flat secondary characters, wooden dialogue, and a logic that falls apart if examined for more than 5 seconds. Why does the president protect a scammer? Because the plot needs her to. How do the beekeepers operate without oversight? Don't ask. But these flaws are features, not bugs. The film knows you are not watching for realistic cybersecurity procedures. You are watching to see Jason Statham burn a building down while saying, "I protect the hive." If you go to The Beekeeper expecting a realistic thriller about phishing scams and FBI procedure, you will hate it. The film will insult your intelligence and waste your time. If you go to see Jason Statham beat a tech bro to death with his bare hands while making bee puns, you will have a fantastic time. The film delivers exactly what it promises, no more and no less. The Beekeeper is the cinematic equivalent of junk food. Purposefully empty, immensely satisfying, and gone before you know it. It does not aspire to art, and it should not be judged as such. The film's success at the box office, $162 million on a $40 million budget, proves that there is still a hungry audience for mid-budget action movies starring aging tough guys. Hollywood would be wise to learn this lesson. Statham has found a comfortable niche playing variations of the same character. The quiet professional who solves problems with violence. The Beekeeper may be the purest expression of that archetype yet. Director David Ayer has had a checkered career, from the critical success of End of Watch to the disastrous Suicide Squad. The Beekeeper represents a return to his strengths, gritty, street-level action with a blue-collar protagonist. The film's script by Kurt Wimmer is intentionally ridiculous. Wimmer is known for high-concept action, equilibrium, law-abiding citizen, and seems uninterested in realism. His dialogue serves the premise, not the other way around. The most memorable line, "To be E or not to be E," is so absurd that it circles back around to genius. Delivered with complete seriousness by Statham, it encapsulates the film's commitment to its own silliness. Eloise's suicide is the film's darkest moment, played without music or manipulation. Felicia Rashad brings genuine pathos to the role, making the audience understand Clay's rage. Without her performance, the film would not work. The relationship between Clay and Eloise is established in just 2 scenes, but those scenes are efficient and warm. We believe they were friends. We believe he would kill for her. Verona's journey from skeptical FBI agent to reluctant ally is undercooked. The film does not have time for her arc, so it simply declares that she has changed her mind. This is one of the film's weaker elements. Wallace's death is the film's most effective scene. Jeremy Irons delivers a monologue about the nature of beekeepers while bleeding out on the floor. He dies with dignity, acknowledging that he was outplayed by a superior predator. The film's treatment of the Secret Service is notable. Agents are depicted as competent but outmatched. They are not villains, they are professionals doing their jobs. Clay kills them anyway because they are in his way. This moral ambiguity is never resolved. The film does not care. Clay is the protagonist, so his actions are justified. Everyone else is an obstacle. This is pure video game logic applied to cinema. The bees themselves appear throughout the film as visual motifs. They land on Clay's hands. They swarm near his face. They seem to recognize him. This mystical connection between man and insect elevates the metaphor to near-religious levels. The final shot of Clay walking away through a golden field, bees circling him, suggests that he is not a man but a force of nature. You cannot arrest a hurricane. You can only get out of its way. The Beekeeper understands its audience perfectly. It knows you are tired of complicated plots, moral gray areas, and deconstructed heroes. It gives you a clear villain, a justified hero, and 105 minutes of cathartic violence. The film does not ask for your intellectual engagement. It asks for your visceral reaction. On that level, it succeeds completely. Your brain may object, but your gut will cheer. This is why the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is significantly higher than the critics' score. Critics overthink, audiences feel. The Beekeeper is designed for feeling, not thinking. The film's release date in January, traditionally a dumping ground for studio movies, reflects its perceived quality, but its box office success turned it into a counter-programming hit. Audiences wanted something simple and satisfying. In a cinematic landscape dominated by franchise obligations and universe building, The Beekeeper is refreshingly standalone. It tells a complete story in 2 hours and ends. No post-credits scene. No sequel setup, though one is possible. This self-contained quality is increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. Sometimes you want a movie that ends, not a movie that points toward another movie. The film's violence is rated R and earns that rating. Limbs are broken, throats are cut, and bodies pile up. This is not action for children. It is action for adults who want to see consequences on screen. Statham performed many of his own stunts, as is his reputation. The physicality of his performance, the way he moves, strikes, and falls, is a dying art in the age of CGI doubles. The Beekeeper celebrates practical action. The film's legacy will likely be as a cult classic rather than a mainstream hit. It is too weird, too violent, and too silly for mass acceptance, but those who love it will love it fiercely. The Beekeeper joins the ranks of crank, shoot 'em up, and hardcore Henry as action films that fully embrace their own absurdity. They are not trying to be Die Hard. They are trying to be Die Hard on drugs. The central performance by Statham is his best in years. He is not asked to act so much as to embody. His face, his posture, his stillness. These are the tools of a physical performer at the top of his game. Josh Hutcherson deserves credit for taking a thankless role and making it memorable. Derek Danforth is hateful, pathetic, and ultimately pitiful. Hutcherson commits fully to the character's degradation. The film establishes its visual language immediately with golden hues dominating every scene involving Adam Clay's apiary, while cold blues and sterile whites define the world of technology and corruption. This chromatic dichotomy serves as a constant subconscious reminder that nature represents order, while human institutions represent chaos and decay. David Ayer, known for his grounded street-level storytelling in End of Watch, applies that same gritty realism to inherently absurd premises, creating a tonal tightrope that somehow holds throughout the runtime. The director has stated in interviews that he approached The Beekeeper as a modern fairy tale rather than a realistic thriller, freeing himself from the constraints of plausibility. This freedom allows the film to escalate from a small-town suicide to a presidential conspiracy without ever pausing to explain how such a leap is possible within established laws of physics or politics. The audience either accepts this escalation or rejects the film entirely, and the box office suggests most viewers chose the former. Kurt Wimmer's screenplay contains structural echoes of his earlier work Law-Abiding Citizen, where a wronged man systematically dismantles the justice system that failed his family. However, The Beekeeper replaces that film's intellectual cat-and-mouse game with pure physical momentum, stripping away dialogue-heavy scenes in favor of action set pieces. Wimmer has described the Beekeeper mythology as something he developed over nearly a decade, waiting for the right star and director to bring it to life. The fact that Jason Statham was attached early in development shaped every subsequent creative decision, from the minimal dialogue to the bone-crunching fight choreography. Statham's production company had significant input on the script, ensuring that Adam Clay remained a man of few words and maximal action. This collaboration between writer, director, and star created a streamlined vision that never wavers from its core promise of brutal vengeance. The production designer reportedly visited multiple apiaries and interviewed real beekeepers to understand the visual language of professional beekeeping, bringing authenticity to Clay's peaceful existence. Small details like the condition of his hands, the stains on his suit, and the arrangement of his hives all reflect months of research into actual beekeeping practices. The character of Eloise Parker serves a function beyond simple motivation, representing an entire generation of elderly Americans who grew up trusting institutions and have become vulnerable to technologically sophisticated predation. Felicia Rashad brings decades of dramatic experience to a role that could have been a mere plot device, infusing Eloise with warmth, dignity, and heartbreaking vulnerability. Her scenes with Statham reveal a gentle chemistry where he softens almost imperceptibly around her, showing flashes of humanity that disappear completely after her death. The film deliberately avoids showing Eloise's actual suicide on camera, instead cutting from her despairing face to Clay discovering her body, a choice that respects the audience's imagination. This restraint contrasts sharply with the graphic violence that follows, suggesting that emotional violence can be more powerful than physical brutality when handled correctly. The charity fund Eloise managed represented her life's work and her connection to her community, making its loss not just financial but existential. When she says earlier in the film that the charity is all that matters to her, the screenplay plants the seed of her eventual despair without telegraphing the suicide too obviously. The scammers specifically targeted her because their algorithms identified her as elderly, financially responsible for others, and likely to be trusting of official-looking communications. This realistic depiction of how phishing operations select victims grounds the film's fantastical elements in recognizable contemporary horror. Eloise's daughter Verona works for the FBI, creating an irony that the film never explicitly states. The system failed Eloise even though her own child is part of that system. This familial connection to law enforcement makes Verona's eventual disillusionment with institutional justice more personally devastating than it would be for a neutral observer. The film implies that if the FBI cannot protect its own agents' families from cybercrime, then no ordinary citizen has any real protection at all. Eloise's kindness toward Clay, bringing him meals, asking about his bees, treating him as a friend rather than a tenant, establishes her as the moral center of the film, someone whose destruction justifies any subsequent atrocity. Adam Clay's transformation from peaceful beekeeper to relentless killer happens without any dramatic monologue or training montage, emphasizing that the violence was always latent within him. This narrative choice treats his beekeeping life as a retirement, not a fundamental personality change, meaning the killer was always present beneath the calm exterior. The film's title therefore refers both to his profession and to his secret identity as a member of a shadowy organization, creating a pun that the script embraces fully. When Clay tells Verona that he protects the hive, he means it literally as a beekeeper and metaphorically as a former operative, the double meaning never acknowledged by other characters. This linguistic layering rewards repeat viewings, as innocuous early statements about bees and hives take on sinister new meanings after the beekeeper revelation. The organization itself is described only in fragments. They have no official existence, no headquarters, no oversight, and no limits on their methods. Wallace Westwild, the former CIA chief, speaks of them with a reverence usually reserved for natural disasters, calling them the thing that keeps the things that keep us safe. This recursive definition suggests that beekeepers sit above all other intelligence agencies, a final failsafe when every other system fails. The film never explains who created the beekeepers, who directs them, or how one becomes a beekeeper, maintaining an essential mystery that distinguishes them from similar secret societies in other films. This ambiguity allows the audience to project their own fantasies of accountability onto the organization, imagining it as whatever check on power they most desire. The fact that beekeepers answer to no elected official is presented as a feature rather than a bug, reflecting the film's deeply cynical view of democratic oversight. When Wallace tells Clay that "you were never supposed to exist," Clay responds only with a punch, suggesting that existence itself is justification enough for extralegal violence. The film's villains are terrified of the beekeepers not because they understand their methods, but because they cannot predict them, operating outside every rule of engagement they know. Derek Danforth represents a specific archetype of millennial villainy that has appeared in several recent action films, combining technological savvy with emotional immaturity and inherited wealth. Josh Hutcherson, best known for heroic roles in the Hunger Games franchise, deliberately sought this against-type casting to break free from his teen idol image. Derek's office features toys, video games, and skateboards alongside computer servers and security monitors, visually representing his arrested development. The character never personally scams anyone, instead employing dozens of workers who execute his criminal strategies while he plays at being a businessman. This distance from the actual harm he causes allows Derek to view his crimes as abstract exercises in profit generation, never confronting the real human consequences. When Clay begins killing his employees, Derek's first response is not guilt or fear, but annoyance that his business operations have been interrupted. His relationship with his mother, President Jessica Danforth, is the source of both his protection and his resentment, as he both needs her power and hates needing it. The film suggests that Derek's entire criminal enterprise exists partly to prove his own competence to a mother who sees him as a disappointment. Jeremy Irons Wallace Westwild treats Derek with barely concealed contempt, calling him the boy and ignoring his orders whenever possible. This dynamic between an experienced professional and an entitled amateur creates much of the film's dramatic tension, as Wallace knows Clay is unstoppable, while Derek remains arrogantly confident. Derek's death, held in place by Clay while he slowly expires from injuries, is the only moment in the film where the character shows genuine fear, his arrogance finally stripped away. The film denies Derek any heroic last stand or clever final move, insisting that some villains deserve only pathetic, undignified ends. Hutcherson has said in interviews that he wanted Derek to be the worst person at the party, someone whose very presence makes everyone uncomfortable. That discomfort translates into audience satisfaction when Clay finally silences him permanently. The action choreography in The Beekeeper deliberately avoids the balletic, almost dance-like quality of the John Wick films in favor of something uglier and more efficient. Statham's character does not spin, twirl, or pause for dramatic effect. He moves directly toward his target and eliminates anyone between them with minimal wasted motion. Each fight scene ends in seconds rather than minutes, with Clay neutralizing threats through overwhelming force rather than extended exchanges. This approach reflects Clay's military and intelligence background, where the goal is not to look cool but to survive and complete the objective. The film's fight coordinator studied real close-quarters combat techniques from Special Forces operators, adapting them for cinematic presentation without losing their essential brutality. When Clay uses a taser in a puddle to electrocute multiple enemies, the scene prioritizes visual impact over realism, but the underlying logic remains consistent within the film's heightened reality. Injuries sustained in one fight carry over to subsequent scenes, with Clay bleeding, limping, and visibly exhausted as the film progresses. This attention to cumulative damage distinguishes The Beekeeper from action films where heroes emerge from every fight unscathed and ready for the next challenge. Clay's signature move, a brutal elbow strike to the temple that drops opponents instantly, appears multiple times, establishing a recognizable physical vocabulary. The film avoids gun fu, the John Wick technique of mixing gunfire with martial arts, in favor of straightforward shooting combined with close-quarters beatings. Firefights are brief and chaotic, with Clay using cover, movement, and aggression to overwhelm armed opponents rather than outgunning them. Ayer's background directing police dramas like End of Watch and Bright informs his approach to action, prioritizing spatial clarity and practical effects over stylistic flourishes. The destruction of the call center serves as the film's centerpiece action sequence, showcasing Clay's methodical approach to dismantling a large facility with multiple defenders. Each floor presents a different tactical challenge, and Clay adapts his approach accordingly, using fire, electricity, and physical force as the situation demands. The FBI's subplot involving Verona Parker and her partner Matt Wiley serves to ground the film's escalating violence in recognizable institutional procedures, at least initially. Emmy Raver-Lampman brings a necessary emotional complexity to Verona, who must balance her grief over her mother's death with her professional obligation to stop a serial killer. The irony that she wants to arrest the man avenging her mother is never lost on Verona, and the film allows that contradiction to create genuine moral tension. Agent Wiley, played by Bobby Naduri, represents the procedural voice who wants to follow rules and protocols even when they seem inadequate to the situation. The partnership between Verona and Wiley echoes classic buddy cop dynamics, but without the comedy, as both agents take their jobs seriously even as the world spirals into absurdity. When Verona discovers that her mother's scammer is connected to the president's son, the film shifts from personal tragedy to systemic critique, suggesting that corruption reaches the highest levels. Verona's decision to ultimately help Clay, rather than arrest him, represents her acceptance that institutional justice has failed, a decision the film presents as tragic rather than triumphant. The FBI agents are never portrayed as incompetent or evil. They are simply outmatched by forces their training never prepared them to face. Their body armor, firearms, and legal authority mean nothing against a beekeeper who operates outside all legal frameworks and answers to no jurisdiction. This power imbalance creates a dark comedy where federal agents arrive at crime scenes only to find Clay has already left, leaving behind piles of bodies and no evidence. The film suggests that law enforcement is designed to catch criminals within the system, not to stop monsters who reject the system entirely. Verona's final scene, watching Clay walk away free, carries no satisfaction, only the exhausted recognition that sometimes justice requires sacrifices she is not willing to make herself. Wallace Westwild functions as the film's Greek chorus, explaining the rules of the beekeeper mythology while also serving as a cautionary figure about the costs of serving corrupt power. Jeremy Irons delivers his lines with the weary precision of a man who has justified atrocities for decades and is tired of his own justifications. Unlike Derek, Wallace immediately understands what Clay is and respects the threat he represents, advocating for negotiation rather than confrontation. His backstory, implied but never shown, includes encounters with beekeepers earlier in his career, leaving him with a healthy fear of their capabilities. When Wallace tells Derek that, "You cannot kill a beekeeper, you can only hope to slow him down," he speaks from traumatic personal experience. His decision to personally confront Clay in the film's final act is framed as a suicide mission he undertakes out of duty rather than any belief in victory. The two men share a mutual recognition before they fight, two apex predators acknowledging each other before one is destroyed. Wallace's death is the film's most emotional moment, as he dies not screaming, but delivering a final monologue about the nature of power and its inevitable corruption. His last words, "You were right to burn it all down," absolve Clay of any guilt while also condemning the world that made his violence necessary. The presence of an actor of Irons' caliber in a supporting role elevates every scene he appears in, lending gravitas to even the silliest dialogue about beekeeping metaphors. Wallace represents the path Clay could have taken: continued service to corrupt masters, endless compromises, eventual death without having changed anything. His tragedy is that he recognized the rot but lacked the courage to cut it out himself, leaving that task to someone younger and more ruthless. The film's treatment of technology and cybersecurity reflects a deliberate choice to prioritize metaphor over technical accuracy, much to the chagrin of real security professionals. The phishing scam that ruins Eloise is depicted realistically in its broad strokes, but simplified in its execution, as real scams are rarely resolved in a single click. Derek's call center operates with a combination of sophisticated hacking tools and old-fashioned social engineering, reflecting how real cybercriminal enterprises function. The film never explains how Derek launders the stolen money, how he avoids law enforcement attention, or how he maintains his operation's security, trusting that audiences will accept these details as background noise. When Clay tracks Derek through a single phone call using Beekeeper techniques, the film explicitly declines to explain what those techniques are, maintaining the mystique of the organization. This magical approach to technology is consistent with the film's fairy tale logic, where expertise is expressed through results rather than processes. The idea that the president's campaign was funded by scam proceeds is structurally necessary to the plot, but economically implausible, as political campaigns have multiple layers of financial oversight. Yet the film's point is not that this specific scenario could happen, but that systemic corruption makes some version of it inevitable somewhere. Verona's FBI team uses standard forensic techniques that consistently arrive too late to catch Clay, reflecting the reality that law enforcement is reactive while vigilantism is proactive. The film's hacking sequences are visually represented through standard movie tropes: green text on black screens, rapid typing, progress bars, recognizable to audiences as computer stuff, without requiring technical understanding. This accessible approach to technology ensures that the film's themes about digital vulnerability reach viewers who might not understand the difference between phishing and malware. The ultimate message about cybersecurity is simple and terrifying. No amount of protection matters if the people doing the protecting are the ones exploiting you. Jessica Danforth, the President of the United States, appears in only 2 scenes but casts a shadow over the entire film as the ultimate source of Derek's protection. Gemma Redgrave plays her as a competent, serious politician who made one catastrophic error in judgment by protecting her son from consequences. The film carefully avoids making her a cartoon villain, instead presenting her as someone who traded her integrity for family loyalty and lost both. Her debate with a political opponent shown on television early in the film establishes her as a public servant with genuine accomplishments and legitimate popularity. The revelation that her campaign was secretly funded by scam profits undermines everything she claims to stand for, turning her into a hypocrite without making her evil. When Clay finally confronts her, she does not beg or threaten but simply asks, "Is there no other way?" This question acknowledges her guilt, while also recognizing that Clay's violence is the only justice remaining. The film does not show her death or arrest, leaving her fate ambiguous as Clay turns his attention to Derek. This ambiguity suggests that removing Derek and exposing the scandal might be punishment enough, or perhaps that the Beekeeper's mission was never about the president at all. Jessica's protection of Derek is presented as a mother's tragic love rather than a political conspiracy, adding gray morality to what might otherwise be a simple good versus evil story. The film implies that Derek became a monster partly because his mother enabled him, raising questions about parental responsibility for adult children's crimes. Unlike Derek, Jessica recognizes Clay's threat immediately and tries to negotiate, showing wisdom that her son lacks. Her final scene shows her alone in the Oval Office, watching news reports of the scandal she cannot contain, a portrait of power's ultimate loneliness. The beekeeping metaphor extends beyond dialogue into the film's structure, with each act representing a different stage of the beekeeper's relationship with the hive. The first act establishes the healthy hive, Eloise's community, Clay's apiary, the peaceful natural world. The second act introduces the wasps and mites, Derek's scam operation, the corruption infecting society. The third act depicts the beekeeper's intervention, Clay's rampage, cutting out the diseased comb. The film's climax, where Clay burns down the 9-star United Center, represents the practice of burning contaminated hives to prevent disease from spreading to healthy colonies. This agricultural reality, that sometimes destroying an entire hive is the only way to save the broader apiary, informs every decision Clay makes, including killing low-level employees who might seem innocent. The film never sentimentalizes these deaths because beekeepers do not sentimentalize individual bees. They prioritize the colony's survival over any single member. When Clay tells Verona that the hive must be protected, He is speaking both metaphorically and literally, expressing a worldview that subordinates individual lives to collective health. This utilitarian ethics may disturb some viewers, but the film never apologizes for it, presenting Clay's actions as necessary rather than compassionate. The bees themselves appear as visual motifs throughout, landing on Clay's hands, surrounding him during moments of decision, even swarming through the call center during his attack. These appearances suggest that Clay has a mystical connection to his bees, that they recognize him as one of their own and respond to his emotional state. When Clay kills, the bees are silent. When he rests, they buzz softly around him, a soundtrack that tells the audience what words cannot express. The film's critical reception among beekeeping communities has been surprisingly positive, with several professional beekeeping organizations praising the accurate depiction of apiary management. Real beekeepers have noted that Statham's handling of the bees, his use of smoke, and his maintenance of the hives all reflect genuine professional practice rather than Hollywood invention. The film's consultant, an actual retired beekeeper who worked on set, ensured that every beekeeping scene met professional standards of accuracy. Even the Beekeeper organization's mythology draws on actual beekeeping terminology, with queen guardians, drone elimination, and hive rot all having real parallels in apicultural practice. This commitment to authenticity in the beekeeping details creates a foundation of credibility that supports the more fantastical elements of the plot. When Clay speaks about his bees with obvious expertise and affection, audiences believe he is truly a beekeeper, making the revelation of his secret identity more surprising. The contrast between the peaceful, methodical work of beekeeping and the violent, chaotic work of assassination becomes the film's central visual tension. Statham reportedly spent 2 weeks training with actual beekeepers, learning to handle bees safely and to understand the rhythms of apiary work. This preparation shows in his performance, which treats beekeeping not as a quirky hobby, but as a serious profession requiring real skill and knowledge. The film's bee scenes are shot with macro lenses and close attention to the insect's movement, capturing the beauty and danger of being surrounded by thousands of stinging creatures. These sequences offer moments of genuine tranquility between action set pieces, giving the audience space to breathe while still advancing the film's thematic concerns. The film's box office success, grossing over $162 million worldwide against a $40 million budget, demonstrates the continued viability of mid-budget action cinema aimed at adult audiences. In an era dominated by superhero franchises costing $200 million or more, The Beekeeper proved that a simple concept executed well could still find a substantial audience. The film performed particularly well in international markets, where Statham has long been a reliable draw regardless of critical reception or domestic performance. China alone contributed over $30 million to the global total, reflecting Statham's popularity in Asian markets developed through the Fast and Furious and Meg franchises. The film's January release date, typically considered a dumping ground for movies the studio lacks confidence in, became a strategic advantage as counter-programming against award-season prestige pictures. Older audiences who rarely watch superhero films turned out for The Beekeeper, appreciating its straightforward storytelling and practical action sequences. The film's R rating likely increased its appeal among adults seeking violent entertainment without the compromises of PG-13 action films. Word of mouth played a significant role in the film's sustained box office performance, as audiences told friends about the absurd bee puns and brutal fight scenes. Social media memes featuring Statham's most ridiculous lines spread organically, generating free publicity that traditional marketing could not have purchased. The film's home video and streaming performance will likely exceed its theatrical numbers, as action films often find second lives on digital platforms. A sequel has already been discussed by the producers, though no official announcement has been made as of this writing. The film's open ending, Clay walking away toward an uncertain future, leaves the door wide open for further adventures in the Beekeeper universe. Whether a sequel materializes will depend on streaming numbers and continued audience interest in the property. The film's relationship to the John Wick franchise is complex, as it both borrows from and deliberately distinguishes itself from Keanu Reeves' influential series. Both films feature retired assassins drawn back into violence by the death of a beloved animal companion, a dog in John Wick, bees in The Beekeeper. Both films create elaborate underworld mythologies with specific rules, jargon, and hierarchies that operate beneath normal society. Both films star aging action heroes known for performing their own stunts and bringing physical credibility to their roles. However, The Beekeeper actively rejects John Wick's Baroque visual style, its extended action sequences, and its emotional vulnerability. Where John Wick grieves, Adam Clay simply acts. Where John Wick's world has hotels, coins, and markers, Adam Clay's world has only the hive and its enemies. Where John Wick fights for 10-minute sequences through crowds of enemies, Adam Clay ends fights in seconds and moves on. This contrast positions The Beekeeper as a stripped-down, minimalist response to the maximalist John Wick aesthetic, appealing to viewers who find the Reeves films too elaborate. The commercial success of both franchises suggests that there is room in the marketplace for multiple approaches to the retired assassin revenge genre. Statham has explicitly acknowledged the comparison in interviews, stating that he wanted to create something dirtier and meaner than John Wick's stylized violence. Whether The Beekeeper will inspire its own wave of imitators remains to be seen, but its financial performance makes imitation likely. The film's political implications, while not explored deeply, hover beneath the surface of every scene involving President Danforth or the FBI. The suggestion that the highest office in the land is protected by criminal proceeds reflects a cynical view of American politics that has become increasingly common in popular culture. Unlike more nuanced political thrillers, The Beekeeper offers no solution beyond extrajudicial violence, implying that democracy is insufficient to address corruption. The film never shows voting, protest, journalism, or any other civic response to Derek's crimes, as if these tools simply do not exist or are irrelevant. This erasure of democratic alternatives is the film's most troubling aspect, presenting vigilantism as the only remaining option for justice. However, the film is not a political treatise but an action fantasy, and holding it to standards of political realism may be missing the point entirely. The Beekeeper organization's complete lack of accountability would be terrifying in reality, but is presented as aspirational within the film's fictional world. Audiences who cheer for Clay are not endorsing assassination in real life. They are enjoying a fantasy where problems have clean, violent solutions. The film's French reception, as noted by Allociné, was particularly divided along these political lines, with some critics celebrating its anti-system energy, while others condemned its authoritarian implications. The film's working-class protagonist targeting wealthy, protected elites resonates with contemporary populist sentiments across the political spectrum. Whether this resonance is intentional or accidental is unclear, but it undoubtedly contributed to the film's commercial success. The film's sound design deserves particular praise for its use of silence as a weapon, with long stretches of near-total quiet punctuated by sudden explosions of violence. Composer David Sardi's score is minimal and percussive, avoiding the sweeping orchestral themes that dominate most action cinema. The buzzing of bees serves as a constant ambient sound in peaceful scenes, replaced by deafening silence when Clay enters combat mode. Gunshots in the film are recorded with unusual rawness, lacking the Hollywood reverb that makes cinematic firearms sound powerful rather than painful. Bone cracks, flesh impacts, and breaking glass are all mixed forward, making each act of violence feel immediate and physical. The call center sequence features one of the film's most effective sound design choices. After Clay destroys the main server room, all electronic sounds die, leaving only the hum of fluorescent lights and distant sirens. This audio deprivation creates an atmosphere of dread before any violence occurs, putting the audience on edge for what comes next. Dialogue is recorded cleanly and mixed prominently, ensuring that every pun lands with maximum impact. The film's final scene, with Clay walking away through a golden field, features only the sound of wind, bees, and footsteps. No music, no voiceover, no emotional manipulation. This restraint in the film's most emotional moment demonstrates confidence in the visual storytelling and the audience's ability to feel without being told how to feel. The character of Matt Wiley, Verona's FBI partner, serves an important narrative function despite his limited screen time and development. Bobby Naduri plays Wiley as the voice of institutional reason, constantly reminding Verona of the rules, procedures, and legal boundaries she is tempted to cross. His skepticism about Clay's motives and methods provides a counterpoint to Verona's growing sympathy, preventing the film from becoming an uncritical celebration of vigilantism. When Wiley finally admits that Clay might be right, his conversion carries more weight because it comes from a character who has resisted that conclusion throughout the film. Wiley's death, killed by Wallace's mercenaries while protecting a witness, is the film's second most significant emotional blow, demonstrating the cost of opposing corruption through official channels. Unlike Clay, who survives every encounter, Wiley dies because he followed the rules, a grim statement about the effectiveness of institutional approaches to justice. Verona's grief over her partner's death pushes her toward accepting Clay's methods, completing her arc from rule follower to rule breaker. The film never suggests that Wiley deserved his fate or that his approach was wrong. It simply shows that doing things correctly does not guarantee safety or success. This realism about the dangers faced by law enforcement adds gravity to action sequences that might otherwise feel weightless. Wiley represents the thousands of Real agents who put themselves in danger every day, hoping that the system will protect them even when it often fails to do so. The film's various action sequences are distributed strategically across the runtime, ensuring that no more than 15 minutes pass without some form of physical confrontation. The opening fight at the call center establishes Clay's capabilities early, preventing audiences from wondering whether the aging Statham can still deliver credible action. The mid-film sequence where Clay escapes from FBI custody demonstrates his intelligence as well as his physical prowess, solving problems with misdirection rather than violence. The warehouse fight against Wallace's mercenaries is the film's longest and most elaborate action set piece, showcasing Clay's ability to adapt to new environments and weapons. The burning building climax combines multiple action styles, firearms, hand-to-hand, environmental kills, into a sustained sequence that tests Clay's endurance as well as his skill. Each fight teaches the audience something new about Clay's capabilities, preventing repetition from becoming boring. The film avoids the common action movie mistake of peaking too early, saving the most spectacular destruction for the final act. Statham's age is never addressed or apologized for. His character moves like a man in his 50s, relying on technique and experience rather than youthful athleticism. This age-appropriate action choreography makes Clay more credible than a younger actor trying to perform the same moves would be. The film understands that watching a seasoned professional solve problems is more satisfying than watching a young phenom show off. The romantic subplot that dominates most action films is entirely absent from The Beekeeper, a deliberate choice that reinforces Clay's characterization as a man beyond such human attachments. No love interest appears, no flirtation develops, no sexual tension exists between Clay and any female character. This absence allows the film to focus entirely on Clay's mission and the thematic concerns of justice and corruption without distraction. Verona and Clay develop a professional respect for each other, but the film carefully avoids any hint of romantic possibility between them. Eloise's role as a maternal figure rather than a romantic one further emphasizes that Clay's devotion to her is filial rather than sexual. The film suggests that Clay's capacity for love was exhausted or sublimated long ago, leaving only duty, purpose, and the occasional friendly dinner with an elderly neighbor. This asexual portrayal of the action hero is unusual for the genre, which typically pairs its protagonists with attractive female co-stars. Statham himself has often played romantic leads in action films, making his celibate turn in The Beekeeper notable as a departure from type. The film seems to argue that a man who has seen what Clay has seen, done what Clay has done, is no longer capable of romantic love. Whether this is tragic or simply practical is left for the audience to decide, as Clay never discusses it. The film's dialogue, frequently mocked by critics for its earnest puns, actually serves a specific tonal purpose by signaling when the audience should take events seriously and when they should laugh. Early scenes between Clay and Eloise use naturalistic dialogue with no-be references, establishing their relationship as genuinely human and worth caring about. Once Clay begins his rampage, the B metaphors increase in frequency and absurdity, alerting the audience that the film is winking at them. The line "to be E or not to be E" is delivered with such absurd solemnity that it cannot be taken seriously, inviting laughter at the film's own pretensions. This self-awareness prevents The Beekeeper from becoming insufferably grim, providing necessary comic relief in a film about suicide and mass murder. The script's willingness to be mocked is itself a form of confidence, suggesting that the filmmakers know exactly how ridiculous they are being. When serious moments occur, Eloise's death, Wiley's death, Wallace's death, the B puns disappear entirely, restoring dramatic weight. This strategic deployment of humor prevents tonal whiplash, while allowing the film to have its absurdist cake and eat it too. The best action comedies understand that audiences need permission to laugh, and The Beekeeper grants that permission early and often. Statham's deadpan delivery of ridiculous lines is itself a comedic performance, the straight man reacting to increasingly absurd circumstances with complete sincerity. Whether this sincerity is acting or simply Statham's natural intensity is impossible to determine and ultimately irrelevant. The film's ending, with Clay walking away unpunished and uncelebrated, reflects the Beekeeper ethos that individual recognition is irrelevant to mission success. No medal ceremony, no grateful handshake, no romantic embrace closes the film, only a man disappearing into a golden field. This anti-closure is thematically appropriate for a character who exists outside society and cannot return to it after what he has done. Verona watches him go, making no move to arrest him or thank him, simply acknowledging that some debts cannot be repaid and some crimes cannot be judged. The film's final shot, Clay's silhouette against a setting sun, is deliberately ambiguous about whether he walks toward redemption or damnation. The bees that surround him in this last scene suggest that he has found his hive, his purpose, his reason for existing even if that existence is solitary. Unlike John Wick, who returns to a cold, empty house, Clay returns to nature, to his bees, to the only community that has ever accepted him. This ending suggests that Clay's real punishment is not prison or death, but continued life, continued service, continued loneliness interrupted only by violence. The film denies Clay the death he might secretly desire, forcing him to continue protecting hives until he can no longer lift his arms. Whether this is a happy ending or a tragic one depends entirely on whether you view Clay's life as worth living. The film declines to answer, placing that judgment entirely in the audience's hands. The film's production challenges included multiple script rewrites, schedule conflicts with Statham's other commitments, and the difficulty of filming with live bees. Statham reportedly insisted on using real bees for close-up shots, enduring multiple stings during production rather than relying on CGI substitutes. The production employed a full-time beekeeper to manage the thousands of bees used on set, ensuring both actor safety and insect welfare. Several sequences had to be res-hot when weather conditions affected bee behavior, as real insects do not take direction and cannot be reliably controlled. The film's bee consultant has said in interviews that working with Statham was a pleasure, as the actor showed genuine respect for the bees and genuine curiosity about their behavior. The call center fire sequence required extensive safety precautions and multiple takes, as burning a real building with real bees nearby presented obvious risks. Ayer has said that directing The Beekeeper was his most technically challenging project since Fury, which involved operating real tanks in real mud for months. The film's relatively modest budget meant that every dollar had to be visible on screen, with no room for expensive reshoots or extensive post-production fixes. The visual effects team focused their limited resources on enhancing practical effects rather than creating digital ones, resulting in a film that feels tangible rather than artificial. The blood and gore in the fight scenes are almost entirely practical, created by a special effects team that prides itself on old-school techniques. This commitment to practical effects gives The Beekeeper a texture and weight that purely digital action films cannot replicate. The film's legacy within Jason Statham's filmography will likely place it alongside The Transporter and Crank as essential viewing for fans of the actor's particular talents. Unlike some of his later films, which buried Statham under CGI and green screens, The Beekeeper showcases his physical presence, his deadpan humor, and his unique screen charisma. The role of Adam Clay requires Statham to do what he does best: minimal talking, maximum fighting, and an intimidating stillness that suggests violence barely contained. Statham has said in interviews that Clay is the purest version of the characters he has played throughout his career, stripped of unnecessary backstory or emotional complication. The film's success may encourage producers to invest in more original action properties rather than endlessly rebooting existing franchises. Statham's age, 56 during filming, did not hurt the film's box office and may have helped it, as older audiences appreciate seeing a peer succeed on screen. The film's lack of political or social messaging beyond its revenge plot may also have contributed to its broad appeal across demographic and ideological lines. The Beekeeper asks nothing of its audience except their attention and their willingness to accept its absurd premise. In an era where blockbusters increasingly demand emotional investment across multiple films and years, this simplicity feels almost revolutionary. Whether the film will endure as a cult classic or fade into obscurity depends on audience discovery over the coming years. For now, it stands as a successful experiment in what happens when you give Jason Statham a beast suit and let him loose. David Ayer's direction emphasizes wide shots of the Massachusetts landscape that make Clay appear tiny against nature, suggesting a man who has made himself small on purpose after a lifetime of necessary violence. The production design of Clay's barn home reveals deliberate choices about his character. Every surface is functional, every object has a purpose, and nothing decorative exists anywhere in his living space. This austerity extends to his wardrobe, which never changes throughout the film, implying a man who has transcended vanity or social performance entirely. The golden light that bathes every apiary scene creates a visual separation from the cold, artificial lighting of the call center and the sterile fluorescence of FBI offices. When Clay transitions from his farm to Derek's world, the color palette shifts dramatically from warm ambers to harsh blues and whites, signaling an invasion of natural order by technological corruption. Ayer has cited the films of Jean-Pierre Melville, particularly Le Samouraï, as visual influences for The Beekeeper, particularly the use of silence and stillness before violence. The bees themselves function as a visual motif that connects every act, appearing in Clay's dreams, hovering near his face during moments of decision, and even swarming through the call center during his attack. Real beekeepers have noted that the film accurately depicts how bees respond to human emotional states, becoming agitated when their keeper is angry or calm when he is peaceful. This scientific accuracy lends credibility to the mystical connection the film implies between Clay and his insects, grounding fantasy in observable reality. The film's color grading was handled by a team that consulted actual beekeepers about the specific golden hues of healthy honeycomb, ensuring that the most pleasant visuals also carried thematic weight. When Clay kills, the camera often cuts to close-ups of his hands, which are weathered and scarred from years of beekeeping and years of violence before that. These hands become the film's central visual symbol, representing both the gentle work of maintaining hives and the brutal work of eliminating threats. By the film's end, those hands are bloody, burned, and bandaged, yet they still reach gently toward a bee that lands on them in the final shot, completing a visual journey from peace to violence and back to peace. The script's treatment of the FBI as institutionally impotent rather than actively malevolent represents a sophisticated choice that avoids easy caricatures of law enforcement. Verona Parker is never portrayed as incompetent or corrupt. She is simply operating within constraints that her mother's killer does not recognize or respect. The film includes several scenes of FBI agents following proper procedure, filling out forms, requesting warrants, and waiting for approvals while Clay simply walks through walls. This procedural realism makes the audience feel the frustration of the system alongside Verona, creating empathy for her position even as we cheer for Clay's extrajudicial solution. The film's critique is therefore not of individual police or agents, but of the system that binds their hands while criminals exploit every loophole. When Verona finally allows Clay to escape, she is not betraying her oath, but recognizing that her oath was written for a world that no longer exists. The film includes a brief but telling scene where Verona's superior tells her to drop the investigation because it is becoming political, a moment of institutional cowardice that every whistleblower will recognize. This moment transforms Verona from a simple obstacle into a tragic figure, someone who wants to do right but works for an organization that prioritizes convenience over justice. The film never suggests that all FBI agents should become vigilantes. It simply shows one agent making an impossible choice in impossible circumstances. By the credits, Verona has not resigned, not been promoted, not changed in any externally visible way, suggesting that she will continue working within the system even after seeing its failures. This subtle character resolution feels more realistic than a dramatic resignation or conversion, acknowledging that most people continue their jobs even after losing faith in their institutions. Wallace Westwild's exposition about the beekeepers is deliberately incomplete, leaving crucial questions unanswered while answering enough to serve the plot. He explains that beekeepers have existed for centuries, that they operate in complete secrecy, and that they answer to no government or organization on Earth. He does not explain who founded them, how they recruit new members, what happens when a beekeeper goes rogue, or whether there are any checks on their power. This strategic vagueness allows the audience to fill in the gaps with their own fantasies of accountability, imagining the beekeepers as whatever force they most desire to police the powerful. Jeremy Irons delivers this exposition with such weary authority that audiences accept its incompleteness as intentional mystique rather than lazy writing. The film implies that even Wallace, with all his intelligence connections, knows only rumors about the beekeepers rather than verifiable facts about their operations. When he says that beekeepers are the thing that keeps the things that keep us safe, he is admitting that he does not understand them either, that they are fundamentally beyond his comprehension. This recursive definition is nonsense if analyzed logically, but it sounds profound when delivered by Irons in a moment of genuine fear. The film trusts its audience to accept this nonsense because the alternative, a detailed explanation of the beekeepers' origins and operations, would only weaken their mystique. By keeping the organization mysterious, the screenplay allows the beekeepers to function as a symbol rather than a faction, representing the human desire for ultimate accountability rather than any specific group. This symbolic approach distinguishes the Beekeeper from franchise-launching films that over-explain their mythologies in hopes of sequels and spin-offs. The film's confidence in its own ambiguity is admirable, particularly in an era where audiences have been trained to expect exhaustive world-building in every action property. The film's violence against low-level call center employees raises ethical questions that the narrative deliberately refuses to answer, treating these deaths as morally uncomplicated. Many of the workers Clay kills are young people who needed jobs, who may not have known the full extent of the scam operation, or who participated under economic duress. The script includes a brief moment where one worker says, "I just work here," before Clay incapacitates him, acknowledging the objection and then immediately dismissing it. This dismissal reflects the film's utilitarian ethics, which prioritize the protection of innocent victims, like Eloise, over the lives of those who enable victimization. Clay's worldview, as presented by the film, does not distinguish between the mastermind and the foot soldier. Both are parts of the rot that must be cut out to save the hive. Real-world ethical systems would find this position indefensible, but the film exists in a heightened moral universe where nuance is a luxury the innocent cannot afford. The call center sequence is shot and edited to emphasize the workers' complicity, showing them laughing at victims on recorded calls and celebrating their fraudulent successes. By dehumanizing the workers before Clay kills them, the film prepares the audience to accept their deaths as deserved rather than tragic. This manipulation is transparent but effective, as most viewers will not pause to mourn characters the film has explicitly framed as unsympathetic. The ethics of killing the security guards and private contractors who protect Derek are even murkier, as these are professionals doing legitimate jobs with no knowledge of their employer's crimes. The film never addresses whether these guards deserve death, simply showing Clay dispatching them with the same efficiency he applies to the scammers themselves. The character of Derek Danforth represents not just individual evil, but a systemic problem of inherited wealth protecting itself from consequences through institutional capture. Josh Hutcherson's performance emphasizes Derek's complete lack of physical threat, making his power entirely dependent on money, connections, and the armed men those things can purchase. When Derek tries to attack Clay directly in the film's climax, his punches are weak, his stance is wrong, and he is dispatched in seconds, revealing the coward beneath the bravado. This physical impotence is a deliberate contrast to Clay's lethal competence, suggesting that real power is earned through suffering and discipline rather than inherited through blood or money. Derek's office decorations, action figures, video game consoles, a skateboard, are all signifiers of arrested development, a man who never had to grow up because his mother's money ensured he never faced consequences. The film includes a brief but devastating shot of Derek's yearbook photo on his wall, showing a conventionally handsome young man who could have been anything but chose to be a parasite. His relationship with his mother is Oedipal in its intensity, with Derek both craving her approval and resenting her for being the source of everything he has. When President Danforth finally tells Derek that she cannot protect him anymore, his response is not fear but petulant anger, the tantrum of a child whose toy is being taken away. This emotional regression continues until his death, when he finally, for the first time in his life, faces a consequence he cannot buy or bully his way out of. The film's final image of Derek is his face, frozen in terror, as Clay holds him motionless, a portrait of privilege meeting the one thing money cannot defeat. The Beekeeper organization's methods, as demonstrated by Clay, prioritize maximum psychological impact alongside physical destruction, terrorizing enemies before killing them. Clay does not simply kill Derek's employees. He burns their building down, destroys their servers, and leaves their bodies where they will be found. The film shows Clay deliberately allowing one survivor to escape and report what he saw, understanding that fear is a weapon more powerful than any firearm. When he interrogates Derek's lieutenants, he does not torture them for information, but simply asks questions while appearing completely unstoppable, letting their own fear do the work. This psychological warfare extends to his attacks on the 9-Star United Center, which unfold as a series of terrifying set pieces designed to maximize panic among the defenders. The film's sound design emphasizes screams, alarms, and the crackle of fire over dialogue during these sequences, immersing the audience in the defenders' terror. Clay's face remains impassive throughout, a blank mask that offers no mercy and no hatred, simply the execution of necessary work. This emotionlessness is more terrifying than rage would be, as it suggests that Clay is not acting from anger, but from duty, that he would kill anyone in his path without pleasure or remorse. The film implies that this psychological dimension is part of Beekeeper training, that operatives are taught to maximize fear because fear makes enemies make mistakes. When Wallace confronts Clay, he is visibly afraid despite his decades of intelligence experience, proving that the Beekeeper's psychological warfare works even on hardened professionals. The film's villains are not just killed. They are broken, their confidence shattered before their bodies follow, ensuring that no one who survives an encounter with Clay will ever consider opposing him again. The film's relationship to contemporary cybersecurity threats is more accurate in its broad strokes than critics have acknowledged, even if the details are fanciful. The phishing scam that targets LOEs uses realistic techniques. A fake email that appears official, a spoofed login page, and social engineering to overcome her natural caution. Real-world phishing attacks succeed against even sophisticated targets every day, with the FBI reporting billions of dollars in annual losses to such schemes. Derek's call center, with its cubicles, team leaders, and performance metrics, closely resembles actual scam call centers that operate with impunity from countries with lax law enforcement. The film's depiction of these centers as protected by political connections is also realistic, as many such operations pay protection money to local officials or are owned by politically connected individuals. Where the film departs from realism is in the speed and scale of Clay's investigation, which compresses months of forensic work into hours of screen time. The Beekeeper techniques that allow Clay to trace Derek through a single phone call are never explained because no such techniques exist, even in the most advanced intelligence agencies. This magical approach to cybersecurity reflects the film's fairy tale logic rather than any attempt at technical accuracy, prioritizing narrative momentum over educational value. Audiences who work in cybersecurity have noted that the film's inaccuracies are so obvious that they function as comedy rather than misinformation. The film never claims to be realistic about hacking, presenting Clay's abilities as superhuman rather than technical, similar to how John Wick presents gunfights as impossible ballets. By placing cybersecurity in the realm of fantasy rather than realism, the film avoids the uncanny valley where partial accuracy creates greater disbelief than complete invention. Viewers who know nothing about hacking can enjoy the film without being distracted by inaccuracies, while experts can laugh at how absurdly simplified everything is. The film's treatment of age and physical decline is notable for its refusal to acknowledge either, treating 56-year-old Statham as a physical peak performer without comment. Unlike Taken, which made Liam Neeson's age a plot point and a limitation, The Beekeeper never suggests that Clay is too old for the violence he commits. This refusal to address age reflects the Beekeeper mythology, which implies that operatives are chosen for their wisdom and experience rather than their youthful athleticism. Clay does not fight like a young man. He fights like an old one, using leverage, positioning, and efficiency rather than speed and flexibility. The film's fight choreography accommodates Statham's actual physical capabilities rather than pretending he is 25, resulting in movements that look credible for a man in his 50s. When Clay is tired, he shows it, breathing heavily and moving slower as the cumulative damage of multiple fights wears him down. This exhaustion is depicted as earned rather than as age-related decline, the natural result of fighting dozens of opponents rather than the betrayal of an aging body. The film includes no scene where Clay complains about his knees, his back, or any other age-related ailment, accepting his physical condition as simply the vehicle for his mission. Older audience members have responded positively to this portrayal, appreciating that their age is not treated as a disability or a punchline. By ignoring age entirely, the film makes the radical argument that capability is individual rather than generational, that some older people remain dangerous regardless of their birth date. This argument is aspirational rather than realistic, but it serves the film's fantasy of enduring competence against the arrogance of youth. The character of Verona Parker's partner, Matt Wiley, serves as the film's moral thermometer, registering the temperature of Verona's ethical compromises as they occur. Bobby Naduri plays Wiley as a true believer in the system, someone who genuinely thinks that following procedure will eventually produce justice if everyone just does their job correctly. His arc, from skepticism to reluctant acceptance to tragic death, traces the film's argument that the system cannot save those who believe in it. When Wiley finally agrees that Clay might be right, his conversion has the weight of a priest renouncing his faith, a man who has lost his religion of procedure and order. The film kills Wiley not because he deserves death, but because his continued survival would make Verona's compromise with Clay less wrenching. His death scene is shot with clinical detachment, a single gunshot from off-screen that drops him before he can finish his sentence, denying him heroic last words or dramatic final moments. This abruptness is the film's cruelest gesture, suggesting that death does not wait for meaning or closure, that good men die mid-sentence while evil men monologue. Verona's scream when Wiley falls is the most emotional moment in Emmy Raver-Lampman's performance, a raw sound of grief that transcends dialogue or staging. The film never shows Wiley's funeral, his family, or any aftermath of his death, focusing instead on Verona's determination to complete what he died trying to accomplish. This choice keeps the narrative moving while allowing the audience to feel the loss without wallowing in it, a balance that action cinema rarely achieves. Wiley's death is the film's proof that the system fails even its most faithful servants, that believing in the rules does not protect you from those who break them. By the film's end, Verona has not avenged Wiley through legal means, suggesting that his death will join Eloise's as another unpunished crime in a world where justice is not guaranteed. The film's production design for the 9-star United Center emphasizes corporate luxury that masks criminal enterprise, with marble floors, expensive art, and security that would shame a military base. Every surface in Derek's headquarters is designed to project legitimacy, professionalism, and permanence, the physical manifestation of money laundering's purpose. The contrast between the call center's fluorescent squalor and the headquarters' polished grandeur tells a visual story about how crime profits flow upward while risk flows downward. Clay's invasion of this space is filmed as a violation of sacred ground, the uncouth violence of the real world intruding on the fantasy of respectable criminality. The building's destruction by fire is visually cathartic because the building itself is ugly in its beauty, a monument to money that was stolen from the elderly and vulnerable. The film's art department reportedly visited several actual corporate headquarters of companies that had been implicated in financial crimes, drawing inspiration from their defensive architecture and curated aesthetics. Every element of the 9-star design is calculated to intimidate visitors while comforting employees, creating an environment where illegal activity feels normal and justified. When Clay walks through this space, his muddy boots and singed jacket are visual insults to its sterile perfection, a deliberate desecration that the camera emphasizes. The building's final destruction is shown in wide shot, a silhouette against flames that suggests both tragedy and triumph depending on your perspective. No civilians are shown mourning the building's loss, as the film assumes audiences will see its destruction as proportional to the crimes committed within its walls. This assumption may be questionable, but it is visually persuasive, as fire transforms the ugly beautiful building into something purely elemental and indifferent. The film's dialogue contains multiple layers of meaning that reveal themselves only on repeat viewings, particularly in Clay's seemingly innocent early conversations with Eloise. When Clay tells Eloise that he protects the hive from wasps and mites, the audience initially interprets this as beekeeping discussion, not a confession of his former profession. Eloise's response, "Well, someone has to," takes on tragic irony after her death, as she unknowingly endorsed the violence that would avenge her. Clay's statement that he left that life behind is delivered with such weight that first-time viewers sense a backstory without guessing its specifics. The script plants these seeds without watering them, trusting the audience to remember innocuous lines after the revelation about the beekeepers occurs. When Wallace says that beekeepers cut out the rot, He is echoing language Clay used earlier about diseased honeycomb, creating verbal continuity between the literal and metaphorical uses of beekeeping terminology. This linguistic layering rewards attentive viewing while not punishing distracted viewing, as the plot remains comprehensible even if you miss the verbal echoes. The film's funniest line, "To be E or not to be E," works on multiple levels, referencing Shakespeare while also serving as a literal question about whether Clay's bees will survive their ordeal. This pun is so terrible that it becomes brilliant, a moment where the film's commitment to its metaphor transcends good taste and enters the realm of the sublime. Statham's delivery is completely sincere, without the winking self-awareness that would ruin the joke by acknowledging it. The audience is allowed to laugh at the line while also accepting that Clay, as a character, would never make a joke intentionally. This tension between the line's absurdity and its delivery's sincerity is the film's core joke, the same tension that governs its entire tonal balancing act. The film's score by David Sardi uses electronic and orchestral elements sparingly, favoring percussive rhythms that mimic the buzzing of bees in their intensity and unpredictability. Unlike traditional action scores that announce heroism with swelling brass and strings, Sardi's music is often absent entirely, leaving scenes to breathe without emotional manipulation. When the score does appear, it tends towards single notes held for uncomfortable durations, creating tension without resolution until violence erupts. The call center sequence features a throbbing, industrial rhythm that builds as Clay moves through the building, each floor adding a new layer to the percussive texture. After the sequence ends, the music cuts abruptly to silence, a jolt that prevents the audience from relaxing after the action concludes. This rhythmic approach to scoring reflects the film's broader aesthetic of efficiency: no note wasted, no melody extended beyond its functional purpose. Sardi has said in interviews that he viewed the bees themselves as the film's primary musicians, with the score designed to complement rather than compete with their natural drone. The final scene's lack of music is the score's most powerful statement, trusting the visual of Clay walking through golden light to communicate everything the audience needs to feel. This restraint recalls the work of composers like Cliff Martinez, who understand that silence can be more emotionally potent than any melody when deployed correctly. The film's trailer used temp music that was far more conventional, leading some viewers to expect a different sonic experience than the film actually delivers. Those who appreciate unusual action scores have celebrated Sardi's work, while those who wanted traditional heroic music have called the score forgettable. This division mirrors the film's broader reception, where willingness to embrace its idiosyncrasies determines enjoyment. The film's handling of firearms emphasizes practicality over style, with Clay using weapons as tools rather than as extensions of his personality. Unlike John Wick's customized pistols or James Bond's gadget-laden rifles, Clay uses whatever weapons are available, discarding them when empty or inconvenient. The film includes no scenes of Clay cleaning his guns, reloading dramatically, or admiring his weapons, treating firearms as disposable means to an end. This utilitarian approach extends to his marksmanship, which is accurate but not superhuman, with Clay missing shots and needing multiple attempts to hit moving targets. The film's handling of firearms emphasizes practicality over style, with Clay using weapons as tools rather than as extensions of his personality. Unlike John Wick's customized pistols or James Bond's gadget-laden rifles, Clay uses whatever weapons are available, discarding them when empty or inconvenient. The film includes no scenes of Clay cleaning his guns, reloading dramatically, or admiring his weapons, treating firearms as disposable means to an end. This utilitarian approach extends to his marksmanship, which is accurate but not superhuman, with Clay missing shots and needing multiple attempts to hit moving targets. The film's gunfights are chaotic, with Clay moving constantly, using cover, and firing from unconventional positions rather than standing in the open and trading shots. Bullets penetrate walls, ricochet off metal, and miss their targets entirely, creating a sense of danger that pristine action choreography often lacks. When Clay runs out of ammunition, he discards the weapon immediately rather than reloading, switching to hand-to-hand combat or picking up a new gun from a fallen enemy. This constant weapon cycling keeps the action dynamic and unpredictable, as the audience never knows what tool Clay will use to solve his next problem. The film's armorers have noted that Statham trained with real Special Forces tactics, learning to reload under fire and transition between weapons without looking at his hands. These skills are visible in the final film, though the quick cutting of action scenes obscures some of the technical precision. Viewers who pay attention to the gun handling will notice that Clay's techniques are realistic, even if the situations in which he uses them are not. This realism in weapon handling grounds the fantasy, providing a foundation of credibility that supports the film's more absurd elements. The film's title sequence, which appears after the opening scene, consists of bees forming the words "the beekeeper" through swarm behavior, a striking visual that establishes the film's central metaphor immediately. This sequence was created by a visual effects team that studied actual swarm footage, replicating the way bees cluster and move as a single organism. The use of bees to spell the title is both literal, the protagonist is a beekeeper, and thematic. The film is about collective action and the hive mind. No other text appears during this sequence, no credits, no release date, just the title formed by thousands of digital bees against a black background. This minimalism continues throughout the film's credit placement, which favors end credits over opening credits to maintain narrative momentum from the first frame. The decision to delay cast and crew credits until the film's end reflects confidence that audiences care about the story first and the filmmakers second. By the time the end credits roll, the audience has experienced the full arc of revenge and resolution, allowing them to appreciate the craft without impatience. The end credits themselves are accompanied by a song titled "Protect the Hive," performed by a hip-hop artist who was apparently commissioned specifically for this film. This song recaps the film's themes in lyrical form, as if the filmmakers were worried that audiences might have missed the metaphor despite 105 minutes of bee puns. Whether this redundancy is charming or insulting depends on your tolerance for the film's commitment to its central image. The song is unlikely to appear on anyone's playlist outside the context of the film, but it serves its function as a closing punctuation mark. The film's marketing campaign emphasized the bee puns heavily, featuring posters of Statham with bees crawling on his face and taglines like "Protect the Hive" and "Sting like a beekeeper." This marketing was honest about the film's tone, warning audiences not to expect serious drama while promising exactly the kind of action the film delivers. Trailers focused on the call center sequence and the revelation of the Beekeeper organization, avoiding spoilers for the presidential connection that elevates the third act. Social media campaigns encouraged users to share bee-themed memes, many of which went viral and generated free publicity for the film's release. The marketing team reportedly considered a tie-in with an actual honey brand, but decided against it when the brand's lawyers objected to the film's violence. Alternate posters featuring only Statham's silhouette against a honeycomb pattern were used in more conservative international markets, where explicit violence is less accepted. The film's red carpet premiere featured a honey-themed bar serving mead and cocktails made with real honey, creating an immersive experience for attendees. Statham attended the premiere in a custom suit with a subtle honeycomb pattern woven into the fabric, a detail that only close-up photographs revealed. Critics who attended the premiere were given jars of honey as party favors, a gift that struck some as charming and others as condescending. The marketing campaign's success is measurable in the film's box office, which exceeded pre-release tracking by a significant margin. Whether the marketing attracted audiences who would have come anyway or expanded the potential audience is impossible to determine, but the campaign was widely praised within the industry. Future action films with high-concept premises will likely study the Beekeeper's marketing as a model for how to sell absurdity without apology. The film's depiction of the Secret Service, the federal agency responsible for protecting the president and her family, is surprisingly respectful given the film's overall cynicism about institutions. Agents are shown as highly trained, professionally equipped, and genuinely committed to their protective mission, not as cartoon villains or incompetent buffoons. When Clay fights through Secret Service agents in the film's climax, each agent requires real effort to defeat, with Clay suffering injuries in every encounter. The film includes a brief moment where an agent hesitates to shoot because civilians are nearby, a realistic constraint that action films often ignore in favor of indiscriminate gunplay. This respect for the agency makes Clay's victory more impressive, as he is defeating competent opponents rather than punching through paper tigers. The Secret Service's actual procedures, establishing perimeters, coordinating responses, communicating constantly, are depicted with reasonable accuracy, suggesting the filmmakers consulted with real agents. No Secret Service agent in the film is portrayed as corrupt or complicit in Derek's crimes. They are simply doing their jobs protecting a family whose sins they do not know. This distinction between the protectors and the protected is crucial to the film's moral framework, allowing Clay to fight the agents without condemning them as evil. When Clay kills Secret Service agents, the film does not celebrate their deaths or show them in protracted agony, treating their elimination as a tactical necessity rather than a moral victory. The agent's professionalism contrasts sharply with Derek's amateurish cruelty, highlighting how talent and training can serve evil purposes without becoming evil themselves. By separating the agent's actions from Derek's crimes, the film maintains its critique of power without extending that critique to every person who works within powerful institutions. This nuance is rare in action cinema, which typically treats anyone who works for the villain as equally villainous by association. The film's choreography for the final confrontation between Clay and Derek deliberately avoids any pretense of competitiveness, ending the fight almost before it begins. Derek throws a single punch, which Clay blocks easily, and then Clay simply grabs him and holds him while Derek dies from injuries sustained earlier in the sequence. This anticlimax is a deliberate choice, rejecting the action movie convention that the hero must have a prolonged physical struggle with the primary villain. The film's message is that Derek was never a physical threat, that his power was entirely external, and that removing that external protection reveals a pathetic, fragile human being. When Clay holds Derek, he does not speak, does not gloat, does not explain why Derek deserves to die, because the audience already knows and Derek already knows. Derek's death is filmed in close-up, his face cycling through disbelief, fear, acceptance, and finally blankness as his eyes go empty. This extended focus on Derek's dying face forces the audience to witness his humanity, even as they celebrate his death, creating uncomfortable moral complexity. The film does not cut away, does not soften the moment with music, does not allow the audience to avoid looking at what they have been cheering for. By making Derek's death intimate and quiet rather than spectacular and loud, the film asks whether the audience's desire for revenge has been satisfied or soured. Clay's face during this sequence is completely unreadable. Not triumphant, not regretful, not satisfied, just empty, as if the act of killing has brought him no feeling at all. This emptiness is the film's most honest statement about vengeance. It solves the problem but does not heal the wound, leaving the Avenger as hollow as he was before. The film's final scene, with Clay walking away through a golden field, has been interpreted variously as hopeful, nihilistic, or simply ambiguous depending on the viewer's perspective. The golden light suggests something almost religious, a transfiguration of the violent man into something beyond human judgment or understanding. The bees that surround him in this scene seem to welcome him, to recognize him, to claim him as one of their own, returning him to the only community that has ever accepted him. Clay does not look back at the burning building, at Verona watching him, or at any other sign of the human world he is leaving behind. This forward gaze suggests either that he has no regrets or that he cannot bear to look at what he has done, with the film refusing to clarify which interpretation is correct. Verona's face as she watches him go shows exhaustion, grief, and a kind of envy, as if she wishes she could also walk away from the broken system she serves. The film's final shot holds on Clay's silhouette against the sun, shrinking as he moves further away, until he disappears entirely into the light. This visual echo of countless westerns, where the hero rides into the sunset after cleaning up a town, positions Clay as a cowboy in beeskin rather than buckskin. The Western genre's fascination with lone men who bring violence to corrupt places and then leave, never staying to enjoy the peace they purchased, finds new expression in the Beekeeper's ending. Whether this ending is satisfying depends on whether the viewer believes that Clay deserves peace, happiness, or any reward beyond continued existence. The film argues that beekeepers do not get rewards, do not seek rewards, do not even understand the concept of rewards. They simply do the work and move on to the next hive in need of protection. This anticlimactic resolution is true to the character, but may leave audiences wanting more emotional payoff than the film is willing to provide. The film's relationship to the action genre's history is one of homage and rejection in equal measure, borrowing from classics while refusing their sentimentality. The lone Avenger archetype dates back to films like Death Wish and Walking Tall, but The Beekeeper strips away the moral hand-wringing those films often included. Charles Bronson's Paul Kersey agonized over his violence, questioned whether he was becoming as bad as the criminals he killed, and ultimately paid a psychological price for his actions. Clay experiences no such agony, asks no such questions, and shows no psychological damage beyond his already existing emotional emptiness. The film rejects the therapeutic arc that action heroes have followed since the 1970s, returning to a pre-psychological model of heroism where violence is simply a tool. This rejection of psychological realism is the film's most radical choice, as even John Wick includes scenes of grief, rage, and emotional vulnerability between action sequences. Clay is not grieving when he kills. He is working, performing a job that requires no emotional engagement beyond tactical competence. The film's villains are not psychologically complex either, with Derek's motivations reducing to simple greed and entitlement. By flattening everyone's psychology, the film achieves a purity of purpose that more realistic action films sacrifice for character development. Whether this purity is admirable or limiting depends on whether you value action cinema for its action or for its human insights. The Beekeeper makes its choice clear. Action first, humans a distant second, and psychology nowhere to be found. Audiences who accept this choice will find the film refreshing. Those who reject it will find it shallow, with no middle ground possible. The film's sound effects for bee stings are realistic, capturing the sharp, brief pain of an actual sting rather than dramatizing it into something more cinematic. When Clay is stung during the film, his reaction is minimal. A wince, a quick removal of the stinger, and immediate return to whatever he was doing. This realistic reaction contrasts with the exaggerated responses to bee stings in most films, where characters scream, swell comically, or die of allergic reactions. The film includes one anaphylactic reaction, when a character with a known allergy is stung and requires emergency medical attention, acknowledging that bee stings can be dangerous without making every sting fatal. The sound of a single bee buzzing near someone's ear is used as a tension-building device, signaling that violence is imminent without revealing its form. When Clay releases his bees against enemies, the sound shifts from individual buzzing to a collective roar, a wall of noise that communicates the swarm's deadly potential. This collective sound was created by recording hundreds of bees simultaneously and then processing the audio to emphasize certain frequencies. The result is both natural and unnatural, recognizable as bees but more threatening than any real swarm would sound. The film's bee sounds are mixed louder than real bees would be, prioritizing dramatic effect over documentary accuracy. This artistic license is justified by the film's heightened reality, where bees can be trained to attack specific targets on command. No real beekeeper would claim that such training is possible, but the sound design makes the fantasy convincing within the film's own rules. By the end of the film, the sound of bees has become a Pavlovian trigger for violence, making audiences flinch at buzzing even in peaceful scenes. The FBI's investigation techniques, as depicted in the film, are a mix of accurate procedure and Hollywood shortcut, reflecting the need to balance realism with narrative momentum. Verona's team processes crime scenes correctly, photographs evidence, interviews witnesses, and follows chains of custody, hitting the procedural beats that audiences expect from police procedurals. The film compresses the timeline of forensic analysis dramatically, turning weeks of lab work into hours for the sake of plot progression. When Verona traces the scam to Derek's call center, she uses databases and financial records that would take real agents months to analyze, but that serve their narrative function instantly. The film acknowledges this compression through Verona's dialogue, which includes complaints about how long things should take, winking at the audience without breaking their immersion. The relationship between the FBI and the Secret Service is depicted as professionally cooperative but institutionally competitive, a realistic dynamic that adds texture to the third act. When Verona learns that the president is involved, her reaction is not immediate action but careful consultation with superiors, reflecting the chain of command that governs real investigations. The film shows the FBI's internal politics, with agents arguing about jurisdiction, resources, and career implications, details that more simplistic action films would omit. This procedural realism grounds the film's fantasy in recognizable reality, making the absurd elements seem less absurd by contrast. Viewers who work in law enforcement have noted that the film's FBI scenes are more accurate than they expected, even with the compressed timelines and glorified action. This accuracy was likely achieved through consultants who advised the production on proper procedure, ensuring that experts would not be completely alienated. For general audiences, the procedural details create a sense of authenticity that supports their suspension of disbelief throughout the more fantastic sequences. The character of Eloise Parker, though present for only the film's first 15 minutes, casts a shadow over every subsequent scene through the memory of her kindness and her destruction. Felicia Rashad's performance creates a woman of such warmth that her absence is felt physically, a hole in the film's emotional fabric that violence cannot fill. The film returns to images of Eloise throughout: her empty chair, her unfinished knitting, her photograph on Verona's desk, reminding the audience why Clay's rampage continues. These reminders are necessary because Clay himself never mentions Eloise after her death, never speaks of revenge, never articulates his motivation in emotional terms. The film trusts that the audience will remember Eloise without Clay's verbal reminders, that her image is burned into our memories as deeply as into his. When Clay sees a photograph of Eloise in Verona's office, the camera holds on his face for a moment, revealing nothing while implying everything. This moment is the closest the film comes to showing Clay's inner life, a crack in his emotional armor that closes almost as soon as it appears. Eloise's fate, suicide by her own hand after a lifetime of service to others, is the film's indictment of a society that abandons the elderly to predators. Her death is not noble, not heroic, not a sacrifice for a greater good. It is simply a tragedy, a good woman destroyed by evil that she could not have predicted or prevented. By refusing to make Eloise's death meaningful, the film makes it more devastating, as the audience feels the waste without any compensatory narrative payoff. Her last words to Clay, "Take care of the bees," become a benediction and a burden, a dying request that Clay interprets as permission to burn the world down. Whether Eloise would have wanted this violence is never asked, because the film assumes that the dead have no voice and the living must act as their conscience dictates. The film's use of fire as a cleansing element, a visual shorthand for purification through destruction, appears in every major action sequence. The call center burns, the warehouse burns, and finally the 9-Star United Center burns, each fire larger and more complete than the last. Fire in The Beekeeper is never an accident, never collateral damage, always a deliberate tool chosen by Clay to achieve specific tactical and symbolic ends. The visual of a building burning against a night sky is repeated across the film's 3 acts, creating a visual rhythm that prepares the audience for each climax. Unlike water, which appears only in the electrocution scene, fire is associated with Clay's agency, his active choice to destroy rather than simply to kill. The film's color palette shifts toward orange and red during fire sequences, overwhelming the cold blues that dominate the villain's spaces and reclaiming those spaces for natural elements. Real fire safety protocols were followed during filming, with fire marshals on set and CGI used to enhance rather than create the flames shown on screen. The call center fire was filmed partially in a real building that was scheduled for demolition, allowing the production to burn actual structures rather than relying entirely on effects. This commitment to practical fire gives the sequences a texture and unpredictability that digital fire cannot replicate, with smoke behaving organically and flames spreading in ways that cannot be perfectly controlled. Statham performed his own fire stunts, running through burning corridors while wearing fire-resistant gel and protective gear beneath his costume. The actor has said that the fire scenes were the most physically demanding of his career, requiring sustained exertion in extreme heat while maintaining character focus. The final image of the burning headquarters, seen from a distance as Clay walks away, is the film's visual thesis statement: destruction as necessary prelude to renewal, fire as the beekeeper's ultimate tool against disease. The film's rejection of romantic or familial subplots extends to its treatment of Verona's relationship with her mother, which is defined more by absence than by presence. Eloise and Verona share only one brief scene before Eloise's death, a phone call that reveals their warm but distant relationship without explaining its history. The film never shows flashbacks to Verona's childhood, never explains why she became an FBI agent, never explores how her mother's vulnerability might have shaped her career choice. This restraint prevents the film from becoming a mother-daughter drama disguised as an action movie, keeping focus on Clay's vengeance rather than Verona's grief. Yet Verona's grief is visible in her performance, the way she clenches her jaw when discussing her mother's case, the way she flinches at photographs of the crime scene. The film trusts the audience to infer the depth of Verona's loss without requiring her to articulate it in dialogue or flashback. When Verona finally confronts Clay, her question, "Was it worth it?" carries the weight of her mother's death, her partner's death, and all the violence that has unfolded. Clay's answer, "Ask the Hive," is frustratingly cryptic, avoiding accountability while suggesting that the collective judgment of society will determine the value of his actions.